Good morning, park managers, and welcome back. So today I'm doing something a little bit different because I've been asked to make a video where it's a little bit longer, and I thought I'd do it in this platform the way I actually build it rather than just doing a speed build. And yeah, we're going to start off by making the Australian Outback in the tropical map. I don't know how to think there. But yeah, it's not exactly 100% because obviously we can't get red sand. There's various other plants. It's kind of like the best way to try and mimic it, if that one, you know what I mean. So we're going to just place down a load of sand as our sort of main part of this enclosure build, as I do use a lot of sand. I don't really like using the green. And then we're going to prop up where we want our hills in this enclosure. So we're going with some hills, just turn the slope down a wee bit so it's not too menacingly sharp. And it's just to add like a little bit of, you know, flair to the enclosure so it's not completely flat. And we also need an area for our water source, which we might make. I'll make it here. So when I'm doing these, a lot of time, if I'm unsure of what I want to do, it's something I always say in my live streams when someone asks me how I sort of get my enclosures the way I do. If I'm really unsure, I'll go and get like reference pictures. For example, when I first ever made an enclosure for the Australiator, which was meant to be again mimicking the Outback, I just got pictures with the Outback and just sort of like looking at Outback forests and things like this and trying to like see what was in the game that I could add to my enclosure that would somewhat almost replicate it. So we've got our hills, we've got a bit of a water source going on. We're just going to add some other brush because obviously it's not this like beachy sand style stuff. So we're going to add like little bits of rocky areas to it where I know it's not the same colour as the sand rock we're going to use a little bit later on, but it just kind of helps define the enclosure a little bit. So it's just like little areas. I'm just going to add a bit of rock. Just sort of gives me a rough idea whereabouts I want the rock in the enclosure rather than having it everywhere. And it's only like little bits. Then what we'll do is we'll start adding some of those rocks now, and we're going to use the sand like desert rock because it is somewhat almost reddish and will kind of help us with that sort of style and look that we're going to go for. But yeah, honestly, it's one of those things when making these kind of enclosures that it obviously isn't 100%, obviously, because it would be kind of cool to see in the next evolution game like an Australian map, because the red sand is just something that looks amazing. If you are making these kind of enclosures, again, it's going to look a lot better if you do it on a desert map, for example. But not everyone always builds in the desert because, you know, you lose out on a fair few other aspects when you're building on the desert. Some people like the desert, some people don't. My favorite, if you can't tell, is actually building on tropical. So I try and make these maps kind of all on tropical, really, and then I do bounce around between the different types of environments just to show you guys something a little bit different. But we are going a bit messy with the rocks because it's going to be a lot of it. We're going to try and hide up with some of the plants that I actually like using for the Outbacks. So we'll just get a few more of these rocks down and we'll get on to the next stage. I tend to use other than getting the sand brush everywhere, I tend to use the rest of the brushes towards the end of the build because then you kind of flare up the way you'd like it at that point. So I'm going to be using a few plants. One we're going to be using a lot, and that is if you have the Malta DLC, because when I say some of those Malta plants look amazing, mainly that being, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be an olive tree. Pretty sure. So we'll go to the trees. And let's see. Also, I'm trying something a little bit different for the side of TikTok, because obviously usually I make the screen dead small, but I thought I'd try and get it full screen for a change and we'll see what people think about that. So I'm recording both at the same time whilst we're doing this. So you don't get the full view on TikTok in a sense when you watch my live streams. It's going to be a bit similar here. But trust me, on this side of the screen we have got the Mediterranean trees, this being one of my favourites for it, because it looks kind of like straggly, like some of the forests I was like looking at pictures from Australia that's sort of the outbackish, they're kind of really dry, kind of straggly, and yeah, that's the kind of vibe that we're going to go for. So we're going to fill a lot of these mountains up with these and various other plants. Kind of helps though if I actually make sure that it's on random. Because if we don't have it at random, it's going to look the same. I mean, you can just sit there spinning it yourself, but random rotation kind of does that job for you, and it looks kind of nice. So the big ones I'm going to try and not put too close together, because obviously I don't want it too like dense. I want it dense to a point, but not like massively dense. There's got a few other plants that we're going to add to this to make it look a bit more interesting in a sense. We'll do a bit more around the little lake area that we've got going on, the watering hole. So obviously Australopinators need to actually go and drink something. On Sandbox, I do like enjoying watching my animals drink and eat. So when I do this kind of enclosure, I kind of keep it mainly just for carnivores, because obviously you'd have to slap the food source if you want to watch the animals eat food if you have herbivores. And I don't think there's really any kind of vegetation brush that is going to work well enough in here for me that I'm going to actually like the look of. So I'm going to keep this a little bit open, so like it's not exactly in the center, but you don't want it in the center too much, that they can get a direct view of the watering hole. And we'll do something a little bit later with that. We'll bring some of these plants a little bit closer to the water, so not completely too strayed away, as it were. And then we'll go back to Mediterranean. We're going to fill out with loads of these little small ones knocking around everywhere. It kind of does, it's a nice look. And eventually we will go back adding more rocks, just like little rocks here and there, just to break the ground up a bit. Because I feel like when you do this, obviously the thing that's missing is like the grass layer. So when you do, if I go over to the brush over here, like so it's got like different layers of grass, low bearing shrubs. That's the kind of thing that'll be missing from this. So if you don't like keep layering it up with different things at different heights, it kind of feels somewhat empty, which is, we don't really like it. It's noticeable when it's empty. It is noticeable, which is just one of those kind of annoying things. I wish we had more plants at different heights of decoration, but you know, there's always praying for the next game that Frontier are working on, that they might include that. Like more brushes, more plants and rocks and different shapes of things. It'd be kind of interesting. But you can see, this is why I usually do a lot of speed builds, because I personally prefer watching speed builds. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes like I'll skip through like the really long intensive ones where they are building through things, just so I can get like, I get glimpses of it here and there rather than sitting through. I don't always have a great deal of time on my hands to go and sit there and watch like a whole 40-minute video. I don't know how long this will go, but this is one of my favourite things about Jurassic World Evolution, in the sense of, you know, it's not going to take a couple of hours to make a nice looking enclosure, for example. You can sort of like get a decent looking enclosure done in give or take, you know, anywhere between 10 minutes to half an hour, depending how much sort of heart you want to stick into it, as it were. So anyways, we've got this. It's now looking very dry, but still it's looking pretty plain. We'll probably come back to Malta in a second. I want temperate, which I'm pretty sure is on the bottom of the jungle. Jungle? Yeah. There we go, tropical should call it. So on the temperate trees, we're going for its small tree 2. And if you look at it, it looks really dry. It adds an extra, like, sort of different variant of plant to this kind of enclosure. It's quite nice as well, almost bush-like, which I really like. So I do it in like little bits of clusters here and there, or I do it sparse and separate. I try my best not to keep patterns. See, I have a habit of making patterns, in a sense. Like sometimes you'll see me do rocks, and I'll do like 3 rocks in a cluster, or 3 trees in a cluster. Always seems to be 3s when I'm making these things a lot of times. So I try my best to mix it up, because obviously when you do things in clusters like that, it makes it more noticeable to the eye. You're looking at it like, that's a pattern there. That's definitely, you know, obviously it is man-made, but it can sort of take away from your builds a wee bit, I've noticed, especially when looking at my own. I don't know if everyone has the same like point of view when it comes to this kind of thing, but honestly I do try my best to not include a pattern. It can be quite difficult, because sometimes I'm like, not even awake when I'm doing summer builds. I've had like a really rough night, and it's just like, oh, zombie mode essentially. And I sort of spit something out. I'm like, well, I also doing it because I enjoy it. I'm not just doing it for the sake of doing it, because a lot of time I just like, if I have a rough night, I want to keep my sleeping cycle roughly the same. So I'm not going to be taking like a load of midday naps, as it were. But yeah, honestly, try and avoid patterning it out in a sense. So you can see already now, again, it's still a bit low at the bottom, but we're kind of like filling it out a wee bit. It is dense to a point, but it's not tall dense. It's kind of like short dense in a sense. There's a lot of pictures I looked at when I first actually made, I can't remember when I first made this style enclosure. I know it was on Xbox, and it was when I was doing it on YouTube. Might have been a year and a half ago now. I can't really remember. But I did get some reference pictures because I was like, you know what, Australopithecus, Australian. I think it would make sense to try and make an almost Outback looking enclosure. And I'm pretty sure I did it on a temperate map, which I think it turned out quite nicely, in my personal opinion anyway. So yeah, it was a while ago. I got a few reference pictures, and the trees didn't look to be as tall. So, like, you know, obviously you've seen the background here, the trees are pretty tall compared to everything in this enclosure. And the Australopithecus isn't that tall, so it's not going to be above these tree line. But yeah, I'm trying to think where I'm going with it. How different was this tree to that tree? Yeah, there we go. So now we're going to be adding from the temperate autumn. It's the small tree 1. Has a quite a nice colour, almost like dead leaf sort of look to it. But we're not going to add too many. Like, if you look at the difference between them, it's not massively, but it's just something that adds a little bit of different variation to it. Like, it's not too standing out, but it's enough where, oh, that plant's a little bit different from that. Again, it's just adding to that kind of look. That sort of like, 1, dry look. 2, not everything is the same. Because obviously from a distance, if I'm looking at that, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. Obviously it helps with them being at different angles, but we also want to try and a little bit of like colour difference, as it were. You know, like sometimes when you're making your large herds even, you try and like kind of have it so, or we'll all have them as the same base colour, but that one will have a slight different pattern to that, etc, etc, just to make it so they don't look like complete clones of one another. And that's the kind of vibe that we're going to go for with the trees. So you see right now, it's starting to shape up a nice bit, and that's without doing the without finishing the ground off. So I'm quite happy with the way it's turning out. And Australopithecus is just going to look really kind of cool in this. I always find it always looks nice. That's why I added it to my last park build with the archipelago park. I was like, yeah, I definitely want like an Outback theme style enclosure. But again, it's just, I feel like you can make a lot in this game with how, I won't say how little you have, because you do have a fair bit, but compared to other like zoo building games, it can be a bit more challenging. You have to use your imagination a fair bit, which luckily I'm very not short of imagination. I have a lot of imagination when it comes to like doing things. It's probably why I've never got bored of this game. A lot of people ask me, oh, how do you not, how do you keep entertained by the game? How do you not get bored of it? Considering I play it like nearly, well, I do play it every week, but nearly every day. It's like, how do I not get bored of it? But yeah, it's down to imagination, really. So we're going to go to the desert. We won't get the small tree 1. It's not really a tree, it's definitely more like a hedge, but again, it's going to fit quite nicely into this build as like a low bearing kind of plant, and it looks quite nice, especially with the desert rocks. So we're going to go around adding all these into like various different groups, either apart from each other or close to each other, just so it's different in the eyes. It's not the same, because the last thing you want really is to like everything look the same when you're looking at it. Like, you want to be going to different parts of the enclosure, even though you're using the same plants. the different patterns and things like that really do help to kind of break the enclosure up for you, so you're not just looking at the same thing constantly, which is something I like. And this is going to be the last plant I'm going to add to it. I could go around adding various other things, but I feel like sometimes when you are making this kind of enclosure, I saying less is more. We've put a lot into this already, but you can always add too many variation of things. Like right now, I think what we've got in this enclosure is quite the happy medium of like different variants. And like I said, we still got to go back around. We've got to decorate the ground a wee bit, make that a bit different. So it's not just all this lovely golden like tropical sand. It has a bit of like breaking up. We might add more rocky areas just to make it different. Obviously, this is our barren area that we've got here, so we're gonna have to somewhat make that a little bit different. I mean, we can have a look at some of like the brushes if you kind of like, but the issue with this, it's too green on this map. So like on some maps, like the temperate map, it can look alright because the grass is sort of dried out. It's almost dead-like in appearance and isn't like that really sharp, stunning colour that it usually is like on here. So that's why I want to try and avoid the brushes on this particular build. And this is one that does take a little bit longer because you are having to manually sort of place everything. But it is worth it in the end. Especially if you want to give that Australovenator that sort of like Australian style kind of enclosure as best as you can in Jurassic World Evolution. But yeah, put in the comments what kind of enclosures do you enjoy making, the techniques behind them, and what would you like to see in Jurassic World Evolution 3 if that's what it ends up being called. Because I bet there's a few people that hope that we get an Australian map, because that red sand is definitely going to look really cool and amazing. Yeah, so we're getting to the last bit here. Do I want any more of this? That's the question. You got to sort of like go back to it. Might add a bit here, but again, it's trying not to add too much. That is, it's insane in a sense. But you can always add too much to these builds. Right, we're going to add a few more rocks, just sort of here and there loosely, just to make it kind of like something extra on the ground. You see, like especially around these bushy areas, it just feels like a little bit empty because there's nothing underneath it like dry grass and things like that. So we're just going to go and add a few bits here and there, which I think will look quite nice in the end. Because obviously when we start adding like the dirt and things to kind of break up the ground a wee bit more, it definitely does give it a good look. And also with it being quite hilly, you can kind of just say, oh well, some of the ground is washed up but not completely when it's had a rain, and this is why these rocks is somewhat exposed. Again, adding that storytelling to the enclosure always kind of helps, especially like imagination definitely improves this game. Like it really does. I mean, you don't have to have a massive imagination to play this game, it's not what I'm saying at all, but once you just sort of add your own storyline to it, it definitely kind of like builds it up a fair bit. So we'll just get around to doing this. Honestly, I'm quite happy. This is probably one of my favourite enclosures to make, is this style of enclosure right here. I don't know why, it just feels like I've accomplished something with stuff that isn't meant to be, in a sense. Like, you're not, obviously they don't have anything sort of Australian themed in here or anything like that, but we've managed to actually spit out something that could almost pass as being Australian. Almost. With a pinch of salt, or a bucket of salt, whatever you want to say. But I do love this enclosure for like Australovenator. I mean, there's a fair few other things you could add to this kind of enclosure. I made a similar kind of enclosure to this, and we used what did we use now? I think it was Struthiomimus, and I thought it looked really cool seeing them running around. Just kind of made me think of like emu running around. So that was kind of cool. I was like, oh yeah, okay, quite enjoyed that. That's a nice little look that we've got going on. But yeah, you can add really anything you want to this if you wish. But my favourite is obviously I make this for the Australovenator, which was a really cool addition to the game. Like they made it look so cool. Like it just looks completely different. I mean, it's still a theropod, but compared to everything else in the game, it's very recognizable. It's something I think is really underused in the community. When I'm like on like X or Instagram, it's not something I hear get spoken about a lot or see people taking screenshots of it, or it's not really used heavily in people's builds. I feel like it is a really underrated, underused dinosaur in this game. But yeah, so far we've got the rocks. I'm happy now. I'm happy with the trees. So we're gonna go around dusting it up is probably the best way of saying it. So we're going some dirt, and like we're only lightly tapping down on my mouse. You can do the same on controller. Just lightly place it so it's not taking all the sand. And as you see, it's kind of like mixing in with the sand a bit, making it a little bit darker, which I feel like works out quite well. So it's not just this bright, like bright yellowish, golden, sandy sort of colour. It's sort of dirtying it up a bit. Would probably, I mean, it is dirt, so yeah, we are sort of dirtying it up a wee bit, but it's adding like texture to it. Kind of makes it look a bit darker, and it definitely feels like it's now more Outbackish as best as you can in the game. You're gonna hear me say that a lot because it's the best you can do in the game. Let's put it that way. Pinch of salt, imagination, mixes it all in. You've got yourself a recipe for whatever you want to make. And I've seen some interesting builds that people have made with using that pinch of salt, that imagination, and some of them are great. For example, recently I watched Evolution Square make a Mars base. Now that was something I would never think of to do myself, and that is imagination right there, and it looked incredible. It really did. And I was watching it, I was like wow. Nothing I'd ever thought about making. So yeah, like I said, imagination in this game can go a long way. And like I said, we're going to continue doing it up. It's starting to look a lot better than just sand, if you see what I mean. And then wherever you go, you're like, there's a bit more. You just keep going on, just keep adding it. And we're just gently tapping it in. I'm not going to be too bothered about the corners, because at the end of the day, a lot of people ask me, oh, why do you always build in a square? Because I'm just kind of just showing off like in a general area of a kind of environment you can make. Obviously this doesn't have to be a square, it can be completely different shaped, and yeah. So I'm going to add a few rocks here in the open places just to make it so it looks like it's really dried out and there's not much being able to grow. So that's the idea behind it. So it just looks a bit different. What we're going to do, we're going to put the, I know we said we're going to keep it open for the water, but you can sort of see through it. We're going to do this sort of semi kind of crescent sort of shape. I'm going to add the feeder in the center here, so it's almost like it's displayed up a bit. So if, let's say we add some very well patterned Australovenators, it'd be easy to see against the background of all this green. And it's just, again, it's an interesting feature in the enclosure itself. Like, features don't just have to be like natural, because obviously when you go to actual zoos, they sort of like, some enclosures are really nicely designed where there's tons of different like rockery, and it's not just all about the animal inside the enclosure itself. Obviously a great deal of it's about that animal, but then also the decoration trying to mimic its environment and things like that. Just adding extra bits of detail just makes it look interesting. Almost like, well, obviously it's very desert-like the way I've designed it using the sand, but obviously I do love, I think as well what we'll do, we'll add a few little like bushes even, not brushes, bushes to these like little deserty rocky areas just to bring a little bit of life to it. And again, it just makes for nice screenshots when you've got a fair view. So just a little bit here and there. Because again, you can. I always go way overboard when it comes to adding rocks to enclosures. I don't know what it is about adding rocks in this game, but it's just something I've always I like doing. I like making these clusters of rock that like they've broken down over time, or they've just been sort of dropped in there by the keepers just to add a bit of like climbing enrichment. So I think I'd love to see the next game is some enrichment. I feel like that will do the game a lot more things to see, in the sense of just watching how dinosaurs would interact with different things that you add to the enclosure would be quite nice, especially like climbing rocks and things like that. It'd be just somewhat interesting. Oh, don't want me to go. So we've done that. I'm just going to add the odd, let's say, desert bush, because it looks quite nice. Just here and there, just to give a little bit of life to these little desy, rocky kind of areas. And we can also just add like more of like these plants knocking about, but nothing big, so it's like quite fairly new growth is probably the way of saying it. That's the thing, like, you know, when you're building something, if you're not happy with it, the way it looks there and then, you can always go and add to it. It's not like the end of the world. You can take away a bit, add a little bit, and also try and fight the game to where you want your plants. I hope that we don't have this sort of like barrier thing going on in the next one as well, so you can just sort of really mesh things nicely. Obviously with the rocks, you can mesh with the brushes, but you don't want a particular brush in that enclosure, then you sort of have to kind of fight with it just a wee bit. But in the end, you can just sort of get there and get what you want. Right, we're going to go back to Mediterranean. Maybe no. We'll say what we'll stick with what we said. We'll keep it nice and short. About a bit like so. This one deserves maybe two. Maybe two? Yeah, like that. I like sometimes like the shadows the plants make on the rocks, like the way that is sort of like, if it was like where that rock is, I feel like it looks kind of cool. So that's again more interesting features for like when you want to get screenshots if that is your sort of thing. A few things here and there. We'll leave that one. Go back to temperate. Like the bigger ones, we'll just add some of these temperate smallies in, as it were. At the back. Maybe that one at the front. I don't know. No. And it just adds something a little bit interesting. It's sort of broken up a wee bit. And yeah. Right. So. That is the enclosure complete. I'll zoom out a fair bit so everyone, so you can get like a good kind of bird's eye view onto it. It's I don't know how to explain it really, but honestly, this is what I enjoy making for like my style of Australian Outbacks. If there's something you would do different, let me know in the comments. I always find it interesting reading the comments of what people think about my builds and what they would do different, and then that's how I learn as well. It's just seeing what other people do or suggest, and then I kind of like give it a try. And I say it's one of the best ways about this game is its community as a whole is really solid, and it's still ongoing for this game as well, which is really great. And you can learn a lot from each other on how to make your own enclosures. I don't know if anyone else makes this kind of like Australian Outback build. I've never seen anyone else try and do it like the way I do it. To be honest, I don't think I've ever seen anyone try and make an Australian style enclosure, to be honest, especially like I said, as best as you can in the game. But I will leave it from here, from this sort of like, would you call it a vlog? Like this vlog build? I'll probably call it a vlog build. I'll leave it for this vlog build, and we'll get the critters into this, and then I will show you some nice little pan-in shots like I usually do at the end of my videos. But as always, thank you for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.
The Australovenator has been labelled the cheetah of its time, and I can certainly see why. Here we have a hunter with terrific speed, power, and focus. The makeup of a perfect prehistoric predator, really. Just don't get spotted, because there's no way you're going to outrun this one.